Hello everyone, I'm Julia from Vikalinka.com. Welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're making an iconic soup with beets, borscht. It's the recipe that came from my mother and from my grandmother and from her grandmother. My mother was brought up in Ukraine, so this is an authentic recipe and I'm really excited to share it with you. Borscht could be made in so many different ways. There's not just one recipe that everyone follows. Every cook has their own, but there are certain ingredients that have to be in the soup for it to be considered borscht. And you probably guessed it, the main ingredient is the beets. But you also have to add cabbage and potatoes and carrots, onions and garlic, a little bit of garlic. Borscht is usually eaten either vegetarian or with meat, and you could choose whatever your preference is. If you're using a vegetarian version, just use vegetarian stock, and you could add beans instead of meat. I grew up eating a meat version of borscht, so this is the one I will be sharing today. Stock is very, very important, let me tell you. Probably 30% of the taste comes from the stock. So let me show you how I make it. It's very easy, it takes a little bit of time, but what I do, I use my Instant Pot that shaves probably 30 to 40 minutes off. In your Instant Pot, combine quartered onions, roughly chopped celery and carrots. Add a couple of bay leaves and 10 whole peppercorns. I usually use a combination of pork ribs and a beef bone if I have one to get the most flavor out of my stock. Fill it up with water and add a pinch of salt. You don't need to be very exact here, you can add more salt later. Now that all the ingredients are in, we're going to cook it at high pressure for 30 minutes. If you don't have an Instant Pot or any other pressure cooker, don't worry about it. You can just put it in a regular pot and cook it for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. While our stock is cooking, we will prepare our vegetables because there's a lot of peeling, chopping, and grating to do. So I will start with my cabbage and cut it in half. I'm only going to use half. You can use the other half for something else. All right. So the cabbage has a core, so we need to cut that out first. Just make sure that you have a very sharp knife. All right, and slice your cabbage. Now this looks like a lot of cabbage, but like I said, it's a very hearty soup, so don't worry about it. Next, we're going to deal with beets. And you know, cooking beets or cutting and peeling them, it's a messy affair. So for that, I'm going to use my gloves, just because I don't want my hands to be stained for days. And I also will use my food processor because beets are actually really hard. So when you grate them by hand, it takes a lot of effort. And if you have machines, why not use them in the kitchen? All right, so I'm using 4 small ones, or you can use 2 medium ones. And I'm just going to prepare them before I put them in the food processor to grate. I usually peel them, but I just kind of decided on the spot not to bother. I wash them really clean, so it's all good, it's healthy. I'm just cutting the rough patches off because we don't want that. The advantage of using gloves, you can just use your hands and not worry about it. All done. Next, I'm going to grate the carrots the same way. I'm not going to peel them either. Okay, the onion is next. And we're just going to roughly chop it. Okay, now that onions are done, I'm going to move them away from me so I don't cry. Next, we're going to peel and cut potatoes into large chunks. We want them into bigger chunks because we don't want them to fall apart in the soup. We want to keep their shape. All right, so I really don't like peeling potatoes, and I try to get away as often as I can, but for this soup you really do need to peel them. So let's cut them now and put them in cold water until we're ready to use them so they don't turn brown. So they're not too big and not too small. And just like that, all prep is done. Now all we're waiting for our stock, and once that's done, we can get going with the soup. Instead of adding carrots, onions, and garlic raw to the soup, it's traditional to saute them with butter first. That little step adds so much flavor. Sometimes fresh herbs like dill and parsley are also added. Once your stock is done, remove the ribs from the broth and pull the meat off the bones. Then shred the meat with 2 forks. Next, strain the stock. This step is not entirely necessary. You can simply remove the boiled vegetables with a slotted spoon. But I prefer straining it because I like the look of a clear stock. When you're finished, discard the vegetables. They've done their job. So now that the stock is done, it's been purified, we put it through a strainer just because we want it to be clear and doesn't have any impurities. So we're ready to keep going with the soup. Okay, now next we're going to add that meat that we pulled off the bone back in the soup. Carefully without splashing. We're gonna add our beets. You can see the color changing already. And potatoes. Oops, very careful. Don't want any splashing. Now that all of this is done, we need to bring this to a boil. Okay, and lastly we need tomato paste. It's about 3 tablespoons. Okay, now that it's bubbling, it's coming to a boil. I'm going to add my cabbage. All right. And our sauteed carrots and onions. Oh, it's really thick. Just a pinch of salt. And we're gonna cook it for 15 minutes. Our soup is almost ready, and so far we've got sweet flavors from the beets and we have salty flavors here as well. One more thing to do is to add a little bit of sour flavor, and traditionally you either add a little bit of lemon or a little bit of vinegar. I'm going to go with lemon. Just squeeze 1/2 into it and mix it up. You always want to taste it because you might need to add a little bit more salt. Taste it. Oh, it's really delicious, but it does need a little bit of salt. Or maybe quite a bit because it's a big pot. It is so thick. It is a meal in itself. It's not just a little bowl of soup. Big handful of herbs at the end. I'm using dill and parsley here, very traditional flavors, and mix them up. Oh, it smells so good. Now let's serve our borscht. Top each bowl of soup with a dollop of sour cream and sprinkle with fresh dill and parsley. I hope you enjoyed this recipe. I know that beets could be intimidating for some people, but they are comfort food for me, and especially this soup. It's perfect for colder days in the autumn and winter, so give it a try and let me know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.